I am on a journey back through time. The first stage of the journey revealed that architecture, medicine and writing, the benchmarks of civilization which we attribute to the Egyptians, have their roots deep in an earlier Neolithic age of great building, of which Stonehenge is perhaps the best known example. A solar temple, astronomical observatory, a Neolithic clock or calendar. Many theories have been put forward to try and explain the riddle of these stones. But we can be sure of one thing: to build Stonehenge would not have been easy. It would have required advanced technologies, social organization, understanding of the environment and of the sun and the moon, trading links, artistic skills, complex religious and cultural beliefs. None of this happened overnight, so where did all this knowledge come from?
It was once thought that Stonehenge was a poor man's pyramid, built by the simple folk of Britain in imitation of their elders and betters that lived on the banks of the Nile. A distant outpost echoing the glories of Egyptian civilization. But it isn't the architectural and astronomical legacy of the pharaohs we see embodied here at Stonehenge. Rather, it's the concrete expression of knowledge that had been native to northwestern Europe for over 20,000 years. The time we've come to know as the Ice Age.
This is the second stage of my journey, back into the Upper Paleolithic period in Europe. The time of cave paintings and woolly mammoths. The time before settled village life, before agriculture, before stone buildings. A span of 30,000 years in which people were hunters and saw no need to change this lifestyle as they adapted to the repeated freeze and thaw of the environment. Vast sheets of ice covered up to 30% of the Earth, the temperature, even in summer, never rising high enough to melt the huge wall of ice and snow which stretched across the continents. Vegetation was scarce, few animals were able to survive. Many were made extinct by successive invasions of ice. I've come to Finland. Today it is only on the edge of the polar ice cap that we can understand the conditions which prevailed at that time. In this harsh environment, bands of nomadic hunters survived for 30,000 years, moving with the seasons, following nature's rhythm. History writes off these people as primitive because they show no conventional signs of progress or civilization throughout this vast swathe of time. They left no stone monuments, built no towns, and had few possessions. But what these Ice Age hunters did leave was a trail of clues, which reveals them to be our social and intellectual equals.
Between 10,000 and 40,000 years ago, during the period known to archaeologists as the Upper Paleolithic, Ice Age people roamed landscapes as immense and as barren as this. Now it strikes me they must have been very ingenious, because how else could they have survived? If they weren't knowledgeable, they'd be dead.
If, as I believe, these hunters were capable of building something like Stonehenge, then there are a number of prerequisites. They would need a knowledge of the environment, the sun, the moon, and the seasons. They would need the ability to invent the right tools. They would need to know how to survive, whatever the weather could throw at them. They must have been intelligent. The trail takes us from the furthest reaches of Finland south to the place that our Ice Age ancestors called home. The foothills of the Pyrenees in southern France. 30,000 years ago, this was the land of the hunter. Man has been a hunter for countless millennia. In the course of innumerable chases, he learned to reconstruct the behavior of his prey, from tracks on the ground, broken branches, excrement, tufts of hair and feathers. He learned to sniff out, record, interpret and classify traces as subtle as saliva. He learned how to execute complex mental operations with lightning speed. The art of tracking, of hunting, is the basis of all deductive and scientific reasoning. Today, detectives and even scientists draw on techniques first used by the ancient hunters. They are all engaged, like me, in the process of interpreting the clues, recognizing the right bits of information, and piecing together the evidence. From the prehistoric reading of animal footprints to the technique of genetic fingerprinting is a trail that links the human mind from Ice Age to Information Age. I'm convinced that the prejudice against our prehistoric forebears is because today we see hunting as somehow mindless, savage and animalistic. It is not. Our impression of a band of simple hunters wandering aimlessly across an inhospitable landscape is the stuff of myth and misinformation. There was nothing simple about these hunters, nor was there anything random about their journeys or where they chose to live. This vast river tunnel, called the Mazdazil, is known by archaeologists as a super site because of the huge number of artifacts recovered from it. Evidence that people returned here again and again. Evidence of a community.
I think you only have to look at the Mastazil. I mean, even today it takes our breath away as we come around the corner and see it. So to Paleolithic people it must have had an incredible impact. And just from its sheer size, I think it must have played a great role in the mythology, the system of beliefs. It is the greatest shelter of the entire region. It's still one of the most important Ice Age sites in the whole of Europe.
And is the fact that it's right by the river, is that an important thing?
Certainly. I mean, the rivers were a key factor in all of Ice Age life. The whole area, these Pyrenean foothills, is very rich in game during the Ice Age, and of course the rivers were teeming with fish. This was an ideal place in which to come together.
At this time, people obviously weren't living in villages like, say, the Neolithic people were, but were they just moving aimlessly around in the landscape?
They were moving around a lot, we know that, but I certainly don't think it was aimless in any way. They will have been living in communities maybe of 20, 25 people, but I'm sure that they must have come together. Whole collections of these communities must have come together, if not every year, then every few years, in places like the Mastazil, the super sites, in order to trade, to barter, to meet potential mates, to play, to have a big get-together, to have a good time.
Once we have a clear picture of Ice Age hunters as intelligent, resourceful people, with forethought, purpose and an understanding of the environment, we can begin to see them as the forerunners of the people that built Stonehenge. Throughout the Pyrenees, there are many sites like the Mas d'Azil that show that hunters didn't live in isolated communities. They would get together with other groups, not only to exchange gossip and gifts, but also ideas. Paleolithic man's great talent was to improve on what nature gave him. 30,000 years later, the innovations of the Ice Age are celebrated in theme parks like this one at Tarascon.
Have mainly
The invention of the spear thrower transformed the hunt.
I have here a spear thrower. A lot of these have bone or antler part, so you can use different woods, anything, and then you just hook it. It goes in the gorge here and just gets armed, and then you throw.
So with the spear throw, does it improve the speed or the precision, the distance you can get, or the power?
I'd say all of that, because
so it's like having another joint on your arm,
another
really,
joint on
yeah.
your arm, and
Yeah.
that represents almost the length of your arm.
So it's basically a very sophisticated technology designed for a lifestyle of hunting and gathering. Okay, maybe we should throw this way in case you kill someone.
And then you just aim and shoot.
Oh, that's a good one.
Want to try?
Yeah, sure.
Go
Okay.
ahead. This
So-
one is lighter, actually. Maybe
Okay.
it's easier to use. That's it.
Like that.
And then you just arm it on the hook.
Okay.
Okay. And there you go.
But the greatest technological advance in the Paleolithic period came over 35,000 years ago with man's control of fire. Without light and without heat, you couldn't survive the Ice Age, no matter how many reindeer you killed. Prehistoric man discovered that by striking flint against iron pyrites, he could collect the sparks in dry tree fungus, which would then smoulder and start to burn. And he invented the bow drill, not a matter of brute force, but brain power. By keeping a steady rhythm, the fire will ignite. Both methods provide a compact fire-making kit which could be carried around easily and used whenever the owner needed it. Man's control of fire is the first rung on the ladder that leads to the smelting of metals in the Bronze and Iron Ages and results in the foundries and steam engines of the Industrial Revolution. It was the cornerstone of future technology. "300 centuries ago, Ice Age men, women and children, families, sat around similar campfires keeping the cold at bay. They were not just surviving this inhospitable environment, they were thriving in it. Their knowledge of their landscape and prey gave them an understanding of the seasons, the sun and the moon.
So here we are at a hunter's feast, and what I've got on my plate here, aside from the bread, which is a Neolithic invention, of mushrooms, chestnuts and salad vegetables, all of which would have been provided by women and not by men. Women would have gathered the bulk of the food, so really it should be called a gatherer's feast.
The image of the highly intelligent hunter amply providing for his family is still only half the story, maybe less than half. The contribution of women and their role in this society reveals even more about life in the Ice Age. In the old Stone Age hunting grounds in the shadows of the French Pyrenees, we have seen that the people of the Ice Age were just as intelligent as we are today. Now I've moved 200 miles north to the Vézère Valley in the Dordogne. Because of its rich prehistoric heritage, it's known as the Valley of Man. But I've come in search of the women and their role in this society. One of the reasons why we underestimate our Stone Age ancestors so often and so systematically is because we only look at half the story. The image of the macho Ice Age hunter single-handedly killing the mammoth has much more to do with the male ego and male archaeologists than with reality. In fact, the Upper Paleolithic diet may have been only 20% meat. So not only is the remaining 80% of food to be accounted for, but also the other 50% of the population gathering it.
What about this image then of man the mighty hunter who's, you know, whether it's a mammoth or some other huge creature, I mean, attacking it with spears and bringing it home to the wife? I mean, is that
Who's going to risk standing in front of, next to, beside, behind adult elephants and attempt to kill them with non-gunpowder related projectiles? The risk is incredible. It's not an exaggeration to say, as it is for most hunter-gatherers, that females are bringing in a large chunk of the bacon, however you define the bacon.
Right.
Women and children were providing berries, leaves, fruits, nuts, vegetables, and some meat like rabbits and hares. We know from the condition of their skeletons that Ice Age people were in very good shape. They had a healthy lifestyle and were living longer than ever before. In fact, studies of skeletons from the later Neolithic period show that with the advent of agriculture, general health and life expectancy went down, not up. So much for progress.
It's really the grandmother revolution in the Upper Paleolithic, because you have grandmothers for the first time, and you've got someone to babysit. Who else are you going to get to babysit? No, seriously.
No, I know. It's just surprising to think about.
Well, yes, because if
No, it makes a lot of sense. That frees you up to do something else.
Exactly. By Upper Paleo, you're having women living to post-reproductive age. You have the grandmother revolution, which has brought us here. Is one take.
You have the tendency in Western society now to think of the old burdens essentially on the social system, and when in point of fact they're repositories not only of infant care kinds of things, but a whole bunch of knowledge. They can not only do a lot of things, they can tell you a lot of things.
For example, we know perfectly well to get huge crashes in reindeer populations every 90 to 100 years. We know this from data in northern latitudes. And so here comes Grandpa, you know, who remembers his father telling him that reindeer crashed. And when reindeer crash or when they don't show up, this is how we handle it.
Ice Age families were living longer than ever before and taking full advantage of everything the older generation could offer. The grandmother revolution meant that the burden of childcare was shared and women were free to play an increasingly active role in a more complex society.
This is where a lot of people come for their summer holidays, not just from other parts of France, but from other countries too. Now, it's a wonderful environment, but in Stone Age times, it was very different. It was like Piccadilly Circus down here. People were coming from what's now Germany and from the Atlantic coast, from further north in France, because this is what archaeologists call an aggregation centre. A place where they would meet relatives, where they exchange goods, raw materials, jewellery, and this is really where they caught up with all the business of the whole region. "35,000 years ago, this small valley of Castelmerle in the Dordogne
was the commercial heart of the region. Here, hundreds of hours of labor were spent transforming the raw material brought down these rivers into thousands of beads.
It's really quite stunning to see in these excavations hundreds, even thousands of beads, for example. Because they're not just making beads out of any old thing. They're making beads basically out of two substances, woolly mammoth ivory and soapstone from exotic sources, hundreds of kilometers away. These are actually beads that are being sewn onto garments, onto presumably animal skin garments, just as a sequined dress, for example, would illustrate today. And that means that the individual elements have to be extremely standardized. They have to be the same shape, the same form, because they constitute individual, almost invisible elements of a larger decorative pattern. We have evidence in this valley that some of the stages of this production only exist at certain of the sites here. It leads me to suspect that a part of this process is taking place in one site, and then the beads are being finished in another site, which suggests that there may be a division of labor that's embedded in this process.
So it's a kind of production line in a way. That must take a lot of organization.
It speaks to a lot of common sense, a lot of skill, a knowledge of the raw materials, and collaboration and communication among different individuals and apparently among different groups. You have to imagine that people had the time to create these kinds of things, and they weren't using every spare moment to put food in their mouths. It's a whole new social world that we're talking about here in evolutionary terms.
These Ice Age communities were not struggling to survive. In fact, they had adapted in a highly effective way to the hostile environment. They had the time to make these thousands of tiny beads, and they had the organizational ability to run a factory, producing beads to a standard size of only 6 millimeters, too small for a man's hand to finish. This must mean that the final process, the end of the production line, was done by women. Castelmel was a busy commercial center with trade and communication networks over amazing distances. And women were at the heart of this complex society, providing food and contributing to the local economy. 1,200 miles northeast of the Vézère Valley, following the trade routes of the Ice Age entrepreneurs, I've come to the wide valleys of Moravia in the Czech Republic, source of their most desirable commodity, mammoth ivory. Archaeological excavations have uncovered more clues about the role of women in these societies and about how highly they were valued.
Compared to the Vézère Valley, this is a much wider valley with floodplains and would have been an environment ideally suited to roaming mammoths. But whether the Stone Age people who actually once camped here, whether they hunted the mammoths or whether they just scavenged from the elephants' graveyards, I don't know. But this place, Dolní Věstonice, which is called the New York of the Upper Paleolithic period, it's a bit hard to visualize because now there's absolutely nothing left of it to see. It's been turned into a vineyard. And I guess I just have to console myself with a glass of the local wine.
The museum house in Dolní Věstonice offers refuge from disappointment. It has some of the most precious treasures of the whole Ice Age, all recovered from this site. There are traces of an extremely early ceramics industry, pieces of animal and some human figurines. And there are hundreds of other fragments which hold the key to yet another breakthrough in technology, which might have remained obscure and hidden had there been anything on TV the night Olga invited Jim around for dinner.
One evening, we were sitting after dinner There was really nothing on the telly worth watching. And I thought, as entertainment, I would show him the slides and ask him what he thought they may have been. And so we projected these, and Jim immediately sort of looked at me and said, very clearly, these are textile impressions.
The discovery made by Olga and Jim meant that textile technologies previously credited to Neolithic times were proven to have existed tens of thousands of years earlier amongst the Ice Age communities of Eastern Europe. Nearly 30,000 years ago, the women here in Dolní Věstonice were weaving their own fine cloths, sewing exotic costumes, braiding their hair, making hats, baskets, ropes and nets. Such was the extent to which they exploited plant fibers in everyday life.
These are scarcely primary essays in the craft. They're already really good at it by the time they're making these things. The level of sophistication in these pieces is already so high that it suggests that they were probably fooling with this technology for at least, 5,000, 10,000 years earlier than this.
At Dolní Věstonice, they're making their textiles by the two methods known today. One, which is twining, and you can do that with your fingers, and you really don't need very many accessory tools for it. On the other hand, they also have plain weave, and to make that, you do need battens or weaving loom sticks or whatever you want to call them. Weaving brings into focus the labor of a group of people that we have not considered before in prehistory, specifically women. We know ethnographically plant-based technologies, from the harvesting of the plants to final production of textiles, is very heavily female-related labor.
There are traces of this Ice Age fashion industry on a number of female statuettes found at various sites across Europe. They depict sewn seams, basket hats and braiding, which speak of a high level of sophistication and aesthetic sensibility. And these, the so-called Venus figurines, what other insights can they offer about the role of women in this elegant society? Just as I was about to look at my Venus figurines, so she's from France, she's a local girl from here in Dolní Věstonice, and most famous of them all, the famous Venus of Willendorf from neighbouring Austria, are all quite buxom, that's true, but all of them are over 20,000 years old, so they're definitely older women. What they were for? Well, some people would say that they're art. Other people would say that they're pornography.
Now, in the past, the view primarily of male archaeologists was that these were all carved by men for men. Many people saw them as a kind of Paleolithic playboy or cheesecake.
Stone Age hunters, when they were out for the day, would have taken their favourite Venus figurine with them to admire. Other people would say that they were made by women
for women's purposes, and of course young girls in the society would have had to be taught all the mysteries of the female life, and it's quite possible that some of these figurines were used for that.
Although there's no way we can tell whether they're made by women or by men, and that they were some kind of fertility symbol.
These may have been some sort of amulets or fetishes, if you will, related to the birthing process, which for me may be more about protecting the mother's health and actually having a successful birthing event than it is about increasing the number of people or about fertility.
So your guess is as good as anybody else's, because
there is no such thing as the generic Venus figurine. There's a lot of pattern variability in them, suggesting that there's a lot of different meaning.
As I leave Dolní Věstonice, it is abundantly clear to me that we have consistently underestimated the people of the Ice Age, not only by denying them the credit for the wealth of technological advances and the complexity and organization of their society, but by denying them the diversity of personality and talent which we give to ourselves. While some people would be conscientious hunters, gatherers, bead makers or weavers, Others probably got out of their heads all the time on magic mushrooms, or gambled away everything they'd saved up for winter and then scrounged off their relatives till spring. You had men and women. You had all kinds of people doing all of the different things that we do today. But what kind of people would want to crawl 250 feet on their stomachs in total darkness to engrave a picture of a young female deer?
2 years, the eye. It is one of the best drawings from the Paleolithic time.
To our way of thinking, things may seem to have happened slowly during the Ice Age. But whether we realize it or not, all the inventions and discoveries of the modern world are the outcome of earlier human ingenuity, which can be traced back to our Paleolithic ancestors. These people were piecing together the world with skill, knowledge, and genius. But in order to glimpse inside their heads, we need to leave these mountains and valleys, the rivers and the rock shelters, and make a voyage into the unknown, underground. Contrary to our primary school prehistory lessons, the great cave complexes of France and Spain were rarely used as homes. They are damp, dark, and inhospitable. Nor were they intended as art galleries, for although some of the paintings are quite accessible, others are not. To reach the paintings here in Neo Cave, you have to walk over half a mile underground. In some parts, prehistoric artists would have had to crawl and climb the often slippery and hazardous rock with just a naked flame to guide them. Their determination to explore deep into the caves was obviously so strong that they were not deterred by any risks. Nor were they hoping for worldly applause for their paintings and engravings, for deep in the earth there was no admiring public. The artists seem to have been communicating not so much with man, but with their gods.
So here we are in the Salon Noir. It's taken 20 minutes to get here from the entrance. And during that 20 minutes, I've realized that the journey is as important as the arriving, and I'm sure this was the same for the prehistoric pilgrims who once came here. And this round room was the ceremonial center of the whole cave. People would have sung, they would have danced, they would have played music, and they would have told stories and myths.
But all of that was over 10,000 years ago. Today, all we have of this whole prehistoric ritual is the visual memory embodied in the animal paintings on the walls.
It's clear from looking at the cave art they had the most intimate, detailed knowledge of the anatomy of the animals, the behavior of the animals. The observation of animals is so precise that we can, in many instances, pinpoint the season that's being depicted. For example, in some cases you have very shaggy horses in their winter coats, or you have salmon, male salmon with a hook on the jaw, which occurs just after spawning when they're exhausted. The more Ice Age art you look at, the more impressed you become by the sheer expertise of these people. They mastered every medium, every kind of technique. They could even engrave around cylinders of antler, so you could never see the whole image at once, and yet when you roll it out or bring it out with a photograph, the animals are in perfect proportion. There's a case in the cave of Lascaux where they drew the famous falling horse, which again is painted all around a rock, so the artist could never see the whole thing at once, and yet when you flatten it out with a photograph, again it's in perfect proportion. These people were astonishingly skilled.
When Lascaux was discovered in 1940, people couldn't believe that the skill and imagination shown in its paintings could have come from Stone Age man. It had to be a fake. But modern man has had to think again about his assumed superiority over his prehistoric ancestors. Perspective, which most people associate with the Renaissance, was right there in the cave of Lascaux. The legs on the far side of the animals, as you can see here, are not joined to the body. There is a very narrow gap between them, which clearly indicates that those are the legs furthest away. Picasso visited the cave of Lascaux, and when he came out, he said, "We have invented nothing." He was quite right, because back in the Ice Age, even more than 30,000 years ago, they were playing around with perspective and using very sophisticated techniques.
Thousands and thousands of people have come to admire the art from all over the world, but by 1963 the paintings had started to suffer from all the human contact in the cave, and the cave was shut off. So what we're looking at now is actually a faithful facsimile of the real Lascaux, and it's a very good one.
The makers of the facsimile were amazed at the skill of these artists, how they used the natural shapes and contours of the rock, the way they use colour, express movement, as well as their grasp of perspective. But if we are to get inside the minds of these prehistoric artists, we need to understand why they painted at all, and in order to do that, we need to know how they painted.
I was born in this country, in this area, and when I was a child I visited several painted caves with my father and my parents, and so since then I am interested in rock art, prehistory and prehistoric rock art.
And you're one of the few prehistorians who can also paint in the prehistoric style.
That's right. I spent 3 years in Australia, and I've seen Australian Aborigines painting. And I learned a lot from them. Painting with fingers, and also the spitting technique, blowing the paint by mouth on the rock.
Michel Laurblanchet has continued his research back in his native France, recreating prehistoric paintings. The most complex to copy was this original in Peshmel Cave, close to where he grew up. It is a panel showing 2 horses.
There are 2 horses, 6 hand stencils. There are 215 black dots, 30 red dots, 7 stencils of folded fingers. But the experiment showed something else. These folded fingers are difficult for a male adult because, you know, to fold the finger like that, it's very hard for a male to do it, whereas for a young woman or a young man, it's easier. And also, when you are painting like that, using the hands, you need your 2 hands. So somebody has to manage with the light. So it means that at least 2 people were working here, one for the light and another one for the painting.
So when people saw just a hint of a horse, you think they would have wanted to almost add something?
Yes, but the cave already showed them, and they suggested what to draw maybe. But there is a relationship between the rock and the painter, and it's a complex relationship.
So it's a kind of dialogue between nature and,
exactly,
and humans.
Dialogue, yes. This giant deer, it was first sketched in red, and it was repainted, redrawn in black on top. Like here, for example, there is a red line, and on top a black one.
So the difference between the oldest and the youngest?
Yes, it's about 10,000 years.
10,000 years. The people who made the later paintings, what do you think they made of these earlier paintings?
Probably They believed that this painting had been made by spirits.
Michel's work has led him to believe that the artists had a special relationship with their caves. The technique of spitting or blowing the paint was a way of breathing life into the rock, of communing with the animals, with the spirits of the natural world. So the painter was also a priest, and to paint was the equivalent of praying. Religion, and I'm sure that's what it is, whether in the 21st century or 300 centuries in the past, religion is about working out where we came from. And this is what our ancestors were doing, just as we continue to do today. The bigger caves were like cathedrals, where people gathered in front of the paintings to hear stories and perform rituals. But other caves were restricted sanctuaries, where only the priest was allowed to enter. For over 10 years, Michel Laublanchet has been unlocking the secrets of Purgasay Cave, a series of small, delicately engraved rooms linked by an extremely narrow tunnel deep underground. No more than a handful of people have visited this cave since an Ice Age artist communed with the spirits in the depths of the earth. So it was with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation that I prepared to become one of the few to venture into this strange and constricted world.
Okay, Richard.
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay. You have to crawl 250 feet on your stomach before you can even sit up. Then there's a succession of 4 rooms, and the further you go into them, the more chaotic the engravings become. This is a communion with the earth, and it is intensely physical. It's a personal experience that forces you to think about where you came from.
There is an ibex, the eye, oval, and the horns with the notches, and the head, the nose, the jaw, the chest. It is complete, a complete animal.
The 2 ears, the eye. It is one of the best drawings of the Paleolithic time. We are in room 4, and the engravings, they depict fantastic creatures made of different parts of different animal species, and we call them usually monsters. This one looks like a doe, the head with the ears,
I see.
but the neck here looks like a horse neck, and the tail looks like a bovine tail. So this animal is partly a doe, partly a horse, and partly a bison or an aurochs. Quite different from the ibex at the beginning.
So in a way you're saying that in this part of the cave the figures are in embryonic form, the animals are not fully formed.
It's difficult to understand, of course, and we don't know exactly, but this is like if the cave was giving birth to the animal world. They are coming from the chaos. They are less naturalistic than at the beginning of the sanctuary.
At the beginning of my journey into the Ice Age, I suggested that Stonehenge, built by Neolithic people about 5,000 years ago, was in fact a concrete expression of a pool of knowledge that had been native to northwestern Europe for over 20,000 years. My travels above and below the landscapes of Ice Age Europe have convinced me, more than ever, that our Upper Paleolithic ancestors were capable of designing and building their own equivalent of Stonehenge. They were more than capable. They had a knowledge of the sun, the moon, and the seasons. They had advanced technologies, craft specialization, and trading links. A creative mind and a religious imperative. A complex social structure. And we know that they were able to pass this knowledge on, down through the generations and across the continents. The products of the ivory bead factory at Castelmerle are almost identical to beads found in Russia. Venus figurines appear in France and the Czech Republic, cave paintings in France and in the southernmost tip of Spain. We may never know whether this knowledge was passed on through myths and from generation to generation, or whether these sophisticated societies could actually record information. But there are clues on the cave walls that suggest these people had advanced notation systems, codes which we are, as yet, unable to crack. For me, though, the fact that these Ice Age communities were able to pass on their knowledge through both time and space is the last piece in my jigsaw. The people of the Upper Paleolithic period could have built their own Stonehenge, so why didn't they? Maybe this small piece of engraved bone, fashioned and used in central France about 12,000 years ago, can point us in the right direction. It is less than 4 inches in length, but the Thai plaque has over 1,000 minute marks engraved on it in a continual serpentine manner. The analogy to think of is a watch face. The individual marks of seconds or minutes mean nothing in isolation, but in the context of the watch face, their significance is obvious. Maybe the same is true of these marks on the Thai plaque. For its Ice Age owner, the meaning would be clear. It has been said that the marks on the back could be the phases of the moon. Perhaps it is a kind of clock, a means of noting the passing of the seasons or of predicting the next solstice. In other words, it can do everything that Stonehenge can do.
Today people seem obsessed with gadgets. They like the freedom to phone, to fax and to email. The freedom to roam, just like our distant ancestors. Remember, these people were hunter-gatherers. They didn't need to leave their mark. They didn't even want to. And why would they have wanted this when they could have this, the pocket Stonehenge?
So far we have journeyed back 40,000 years and discovered that we have been a lot smarter for a lot longer than we've given ourselves credit for. Next stop on the journey is Neanderthal Man. Will the same be true of him?
And that's next Monday at the same time, 9 o'clock. If you'd like details of archaeology or ancient history classes in your area, call Learn Direct free on 0800 100 900. Lines are open 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. weekdays and 9 a.m. to 12 noon on Saturday.